Good morning, Jacob.
Hi, Leah.
I just want to welcome you and really thank you for an interview on Wisdom Speakers Forum.
Mm.
And just want to do a little biography for a moment before we plunge into, in more detail, your very extensive biography and what you have contributed to this local community. It's quite amazing.
I'm 80. It's going to take an hour and a half to do the biography.
Well, we'll just do the salient points. How's that?
Okay. Good.
And congratulations on being 80, by the way. My goodness. I'm not too far behind, but it's a good to mark in terms of time.
It is.
So some of the contributions and that Jacob has made and left with our community are two schools, which we'll talk about later, the Center for Grieving Children, CHIME, the Chaplaincy Institute of Maine, and he's also an author. And he's got a new project, which perhaps we can talk about now and then move back to talk about all those past years. So I know that one of your new projects is spiritual companionship.
Yeah.
So I will hand that over to you to talk about in your own words.
Well, I like that phrase, spiritual companionship, because often the spiritual journey is lonely. And I meet with individuals here in my home office sanctuary for spiritual companionship. And I define that as really an opportunity to look deep into a person's life and find the connection to the spirit. We're physical souls, we're emotional souls, we're intellectual souls, and we're spiritual souls. That model came from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, with whom I studied for a while and then led workshops for her. But she was not that great at attributing where she got those ideas. They really go way back into the Native American cultures and even farther back than that. But the idea of spiritual companionship is a chance to ask what the divine is asking of you and take a deep look at what your life is and isn't. When I was a counselor a number of years ago, specializing in grief, I finally realized that families were coming to me with wounded souls. And it was at that point that I went back to school myself, to divinity school, and studied with Matthew Fox, and eventually became ordained as an interfaith minister. But underneath all of the, you could call it the suffering in general terms, the suffering of people who came in for counseling was the spiritual realm. And some people were slightly aware of that. Many people were not aware of that at all. But we, in our lives as humans, encounter suffering today, tomorrow, yesterday, and the natural, Elizabeth would call it the natural emotions that come with suffering, emotions like grief and sadness and anger. Don't forget anger. And of course, anxiety and depression and love. All of those feelings are natural feelings. And I think the important thing is to allow those feelings to come up and be expressed. And sometimes that's the first thing that happens in spiritual companionship. Those feelings hang around. They're like tapping you on the shoulder. Don't forget about me. And once the feelings begin to flow, my understanding is that opens up pathways to the spiritual realms. It's as if the feelings are clearing out, cleaning out those pathways to the spiritual realm. So spiritual companionship may in fact begin with the natural emotions, offering a time and a place, a safe place to express those. and then move into the spiritual realm. Some people really have no practices in their lives, so they sometimes want to learn how to build time and space for spiritual practices into their lives. Sometimes they're interfaith in nature, sometimes not. But to allow the spiritual a place in your life seems to be a core feature of spiritual companionship. And that's very much in the present moment, Leah. It's not about yesterday. It's not about a plan for tomorrow. It's about the present moment. So I think I'll pause there.
Yes, it's quite beautiful, very touching for me to hear that. I'm wondering what drew you to call what you do companionship?
I think my own loneliness drew me to that understanding and that word. And it's not so much, I mean, I feel inordinately blessed to have a number of friends in the human realm. And I'm grateful for that. I'm exceedingly grateful for that. And yet there is the loneliness of the spiritual journey. And that begins to melt, the loneliness begins to melt away for me when I remember, and it's an everyday process, the remembering process, but when I remember that I'm connected to the divine. I'll give you an example that's close to my heart. About a year and a half ago, my wife, Christine, died. And I was deeply grieving. I was fierce about grieving. I did not allow myself to have any distractions from the grief, like sex, alcohol, liquor, whatever, television. And then I had a minor legal issue come up, and I needed some help. And I knew that was a distraction. If I had tried to deal with this issue myself, that would have been a major distraction. Mm-hmm. I called up a neighbor and I said, could you come over and help me? She's an attorney. She and her husband came over and they sat on this couch here in my office. And I began to describe the legal issue. And she leaned forward and said, I'll take care of it. Done. I'll handle it. I mean, I hadn't even described, there were a lot of details and so forth and so on. And I was so grateful for her because that took the issue off my shoulders and I could get back to my grieving process. And then, of course, my work was to really let go and let her do it. But then a couple of days later, it hadn't gone away and something was still to come. Didn't quite understand that. And then it probably took 3 or 4 days. And then I got it because I understood that she was the divine feminine. And she was telling me, I'll handle it. Don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. Don't worry.
How beautiful.
Did you know that she was the divine feminine? Probably not. She's a lot younger than I am. That'll come eventually. But it didn't matter because she was telling me as this divine feminine, speaking for the divine feminine, I'll handle it. And so the loneliness melted away another layer, and I felt the connection to the divine.
How beautiful. How beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I appreciate sharing it because every time I share it, it drops down to another level of understanding and appreciation and gratitude for me.
Yes. So this is, just to be clear for people who might be listening, you are available for people to receive spiritual companionship.
Yeah, I provide it here.
With you.
And there are a few people that use Zoom. That works as well, probably.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's, I think you're going to share my website and my
yes.
Email. Just email me if you're interested in that. That's a good way to reach me. Yeah.
Great. So perhaps this is a good time for you to share your book. More
Yeah,
books.
I've written 3 books.
Uh-huh.
They're all extremely different one from another. One grew out of my doctoral program with Matthew Fox and other teachers
Uh-huh.
in California. I put together some morning meditations and some morning daily meditation gifts. Here's what the book looks like. Can you see it on your screen there?
Hold it up a little bit higher and a little bit further. Right there. Perfect.
Okay. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. These meditations are very, they have a form in the sense that there's 7 different paragraphs starting out with some silence and
Mm-hmm.
then leading into all of the 4 quadrants that I mentioned a minute ago, looking at your physical quadrant, your emotional quadrant, your intellectual quadrant, and finally the spiritual quadrant. And then there's some time, very brief time for meditation. And these are, I wanted to add that all of these meditations are available on Insight Timer. Do you know about Insight Timer?
I do. It's an app
Yeah. It's
that
a
people can get. Yes.
free phone app called Insight Timer, and I've been recording these meditations for years now. And there's a lot from the book available in Insight Timer. They're brief. They're probably 5 or 6 minutes, and you can adjust so that you can have more silence if you want for meditation. So there's a flexibility about that. And then I've also got some other teachings up on Insight Timer. It's a useful app. Some people use it just for the timer part of it, to time their meditations, because you can set it up for however much time you want. And then you can set up like Tibetan bowls at the end or beginning, and that works really well. I use it almost every day.
For that.
Yeah.
And you can, people can hear you if they choose on Insight Timer.
Yeah.
So there's some teachings that you've given and lectures that are available on Insight Timer.
Yeah. A feature of Insight Timer for me that I really appreciate is every so often, almost once a day, I get some kind of response from somebody around the world. And it's real. Sometimes they just say, thank you, Jacob, or whatever. But sometimes they go into a little more detail about how the meditation or the teaching is useful for them, is affecting them, is somehow showing up at just the right time in their own life. And it's completely random. But I really value that.
Yes.
It's really fun to see where it comes from and what they say.
Right. And that you're touching people who knows where, in any location.
Who knows where?
Any location.
Yeah. And I think another piece of it for me is that it demonstrates that meditation is really universal.
Mm-hmm.
And the teachings about grief in particular are also universal, and they cut across all nationalities and cultural lines, and seem to speak to people in their heart.
Yes.
Yeah.
A universal language and a universal phenomenon.
Yeah.
That touches every life at some point, at some time. So, yes. Would you like to mention your other books while we're on books?
A couple of other books. One is called Essence, The Emotional Path to Spirit. I'll put that up on the screen as well. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Essence, The Emotional Path to Spirit. It's really a compilation of the teachings that I've used and developed, and I give a lot of examples about how they've affected me in my own life. Stories about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, working with her, and my own journey, including the Center for Grieving Children, which you mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And the third book, I don't have a copy of that, but that's, again, I emphasize that they're very different books. The third book is a memoir about starting Collins Brooks School, the Summerhill School that I started in Freeport a long time ago.
Great. I'd really, really love to actually read all 3. So I didn't know.
That book is called We're Gaining, because that's a typical Maine expression I had a neighbor who had a little backhoe business, and I asked him to dig the holes for the foundation of the first school building. This was way back in 1969, the summer of 1969. And I was very energized and impatient, and I would go up to him and I'd say, "Ray, how's the foundation hole coming?" And he, every single day I asked him, he would say, "We're gaining." That seemed like it was a good title for the book.
Perfect. Oh my goodness. Well, while we're on that subject, perhaps now we could head back to the many years and the many accomplishments that are still here, are still alive and well. So
it's a paradox, isn't it, Leah? Because you and I both know that life is happening in the present moment, and we have these histories. We did these things.
We did.
Whatever, and that's in the past, and we don't want to live there, but they're part of our story, but we're not our story. So it's the mystical paradox, I think, the mystical paradox.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. And at the same time, to be able to value what we have left.
Mm. Yeah.
What we have created and what we've left for others in our lives.
Well, to go back, I went to very traditional schools. I went to a prep school. I went to an Ivy League college. And after I got out, I made a hard turn left and found my way to Summerhill. The whole idea of the English school called Summerhill was that if anybody, whether they were a teacher or a student, had a problem or just something they wanted to share, they would go out and they would ring the school bell, and the whole school would stop and everybody would gather. And the typical phrase was, "Who rang the bell and why?" And whoever did got a chance to say, "Well, this is what I'm worried about," or "This is my problem," or say what they had to say. And the essence of that is community, because all of a sudden, whoever rang the bell, it was not alone, but they had a bunch of listeners. Some people weren't too happy that they had to stop what they were doing and come to the school meeting, but they came because they were curious. And that in that meeting, you got to share what was on your mind or in your heart, and everybody listened. And I would say we never always came up with a solution, but we did sometimes. Sometimes it wasn't even called for a solution. It was just an opportunity to share what was really going on. And that made a huge difference to the school. It was the essence of the school. And it made a huge difference to me, because suddenly, instead of being alone with a problem, you were with other people. I was with other people. I rang the bell as the director sometimes too, for sure. And that sense of community, as you encouraged me to look back in my life, that sense of community is really a common thread through all the years. Other places that I've been involved with have that feature as well. And it, I guess one way to describe it is democracy. It's a way for everyone present to have a voice in the decisions that are made. And sometimes, as I said, decisions were necessary, sometimes not, but the sense of being together as a group and being able to be honest about what you were feeling or wanting was essential.
Yeah, very beautiful, particularly in a culture such as this one, which values independence and autonomy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, but can very much lead to alienation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or
we're speaking in a state and a region, Maine and New England, where that's really emphasized a lot, the individuality, the individual, so forth. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it certainly has its place, but to have an institution that uh, that it brings forth and values community and belonging
Yeah.
and support
Yeah. Yeah. It
is
was really the foundation of the school. And I have a story to tell you that's quite recent.
Mhm.
We've just we're in the middle of the holidays, and completely unexpectedly, I think this was about 3 days ago, I got an email from a Collinsbrook student. Collinsbrook was started in 1969. That's over 50 years ago. So
Wow.
I got an unexpected email from a Collinsbrook alumni who has emigrated a number of years ago to New Zealand, all the way from the other side of the globe. It was so much, it meant so much to me. She just sort of was wondering about me and how I'm doing and so forth, and got on the internet and sent me an email. So we had a wonderful exchange. It's really cool.
How beautiful to
So
know that the impact is still there.
yeah, that link is,
Yes.
is still there. I think it's continues to flourish and be important.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. And just to be clear, Collinsbrook is another school that you started.
Collinsbrook was the Summer Hill School
Yeah.
that I
Aha.
started in
Okay.
Freeport, and that was 1969. It ran for 7 years, and at that point, well, I was burned out. My marriage was falling apart, but even more importantly, the ideas of the school were slowly seeping into the public school system. It didn't last very long, but the ideas were called back then open schools, and also schools without walls.
Yeah.
And that was a wonderful time. I mean, we were thinking of, the 60s and the 70s. It was a time of real questioning and social change, and the public education system responded, albeit briefly, to those. I would use the word democracy, where students had the right and the privilege, really, to say what was going on in the classroom and decide for themselves what they wanted to learn. That was a critical feature of the school that I started, Collinsbrook. The kids could go to class or not, and they could choose what to study. Yeah.
Yes.
There was always, I'll share one more thing that I learned watching the kids at Collinsbrook School. It turned out that we had both day and then soon boarding students. And it turned out that the longer a student had been in conventional public schools, sometimes private schools, where they had to go to class, the longer they stayed out of class at Collinsbrook School. The little kids, on the other hand, who hadn't had very much public schooling,
Right.
were ready to go. The little kids, 5, 6, 7 years old,
Interesting.
they had a couple of days out of class, and then they said they marched into the classroom and said, I want to do this. And the teacher, I mean, what a great experience for a teacher.
Yes.
Kids
Yes.
that really wanted to learn. It's really the core, I think, of teaching. Really, people want to learn, and they show up because they want to learn. The teenagers, not so much. They stayed away from class for a long time.
And yes, to not feel coerced
Yeah,
is quite a privilege in a way.
yeah.
Quite a privilege.
And I think it's the encouragement to look inside
Mm-hmm.
and say, well, what do I want to know about?
Yes.
And of course, any child has many, many, many answers to that. They want to know about a lot of things. Yeah, and they could do that.
Right. Natural curiosity.
Yeah, that's a good
Yes.
way to say it. The natural curiosity. Yeah.
How I wish I'd known about that school way back when.
Yeah.
It's quite beautiful. And of course, I know nothing's perfect, but those ideas and putting those ideas into action I mean, into education is quite profound.
Yeah. I think the ideas are still around, Leah. They're just um, not as, they're not labeled as Summerhill, I think, but I think
Yes.
it's a very healing experience for a child to be um, honored and encouraged to look inside rather than meeting somebody else's requirements, to look inside, because there's a validity to that, and there's I think a huge energizing strength about that.
Yes. Yeah. And a valuing. It's interesting because along with community, there's also the valuing of somebody's own uniqueness.
Yeah, that's a good way to say it. A valuing of somebody's own uniqueness. Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. I mean, I think
Both.
we do that. We struggle a lot as in our culture as teenagers,
Oh,
and what we're really looking for is exactly that. You know, what's
yes.
inside that wants to be manifested in the world, and sometimes you can find that in a job, sometimes not. But that's what the searching is about.
Absolutely. So to provide an environment where both were happening, the support and the valuing is quite in itself unique.
Yeah.
So perhaps I know we've talked about the Center for Grieving Children, which is still functioning, but perhaps you could say something about how that began, what your own motivation in that was, and how it's functioning now.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
Um,
It's timely because the center is about to celebrate their 35th year. It's
Wow.
quite amazing to me. I remember I was back then. This is the mid to late 80s. I was a grief counselor and I had a private practice in grief. And I had a really good friend, Bill Hemmons, and he experienced a deep loss in his own family when his sister died from cancer. And Bill was grief stricken, but he also was left with his niece, who was then about 6. And he had no idea how to help his niece with her feelings of having just lost her mother. And one day, these are not really coincidences, although we call them that, he saw a brief morning television segment on the Dougy Center in Portland, Oregon. And his life changed in that moment because there was a place in Oregon. It was the very first grieving center in the country where people could come together, families could come together, and with volunteer facilitators, be in groups where they could express their natural emotions. And Bill was so taken with that idea that he went out to Oregon a couple of months later and studied, went to a workshop at the Dougy Center and learned about what their programs were. And he came back and he asked me if I would help him start a center here. I remember I was sitting out in the backyard reading a book called The Winds of War about the Second World War, Herman Wouk's book, novel. And I was so, especially in retrospect, I was so touched because when Bill came over and I put that book down and figuratively speaking, took up the project with Bill of starting a center for grieving children. So put down war and picked up peace, I think, in retrospect. Yes. And Bill had no idea about any of this natural emotions or counseling. He was a stockbroker at the time.
My goodness.
So we put together a program. I designed the training for the volunteers, and Bill was in that first class. and the center started in 1987. And we rented space. We had space in church basements, and it was years later before we had an actual building that we could call our own. But the center now is close by here in Portland on Forest Avenue and provides free groups for families. All the families come together as the evening begins, and there's an opening circle. Maybe that takes only 5 or 10 minutes. And then the families divide into groups by age. So the little kids have a group, the middle kids and the teenagers have a group, and the parents have their own group. And there's a safe place for each age group to express their natural emotions. Everybody grieves differently.
Yes.
And everybody needs an opportunity to express whatever it is. Some people grieve openly, some people grieve quietly, some people grieve loudly, some people grieve intellectually. They want to talk about it. Some people don't have words at all. They just want to scream or cry or tell stories about how much they love the person who died. But each individual is, I think, a good way to say it is accepted as they are, what they're feeling that particular night. And then at the end of the night, an hour or so later, they come back together for a closing circle at the end of the evening.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So it's really a center for grieving families.
I think that's true, Leah. Yeah, that's a good way to say it.
Yeah.
We have every so often we have an adult that wants to come, and no, it's grieving children. The kids, and it's fascinating to watch over time how the kids come in, and with that kind of encouragement to express what they're feeling, they do it in a relatively short amount of time. The adults, being older, have many more years and therefore many more feelings, certainly losses.
Yeah.
So sometimes the families have to have a difficult decision about, wait, are we still want to come here? The kids are ready to go, and the parents, no, I want to stay. So there are some adult groups at the center as well. But it's fascinating to watch the kids. They come and they get right into it, and after months, a few months, whatever, they're ready to leave.
Yes, and then adults develop all sorts of complexities.
Yeah.
That make it. Yes.
Yeah.
I'd love you to talk. I know we've spoken about the volcano room.
Oh yeah.
Which really fascinated me.
Yeah.
So.
That to this day is the favorite room at the center, I think. And I always love the fact that it was named for nature, one of nature's expressions, volcano. Sometimes people call it a hurricane room or whatever, or tornado room. But the idea is that the room is a safe place to express anger, particularly anger. We didn't start out with a volcano room, but after a couple of years, the facilitators came to me and they said, well, it's nice to sit around and talk, but some of the kids and even some of the adults, they don't have words for their anger. They need to express it physically. So over time, we developed this room that literally has padded walls, lots of pillows, lots of butacas, those foam stored, and lots of old newspapers and magazines. And whoever's in the room, there's usually 2 or 3 people at a time, expresses anger physically, ripping up the phone books, pounding on the phone books, tearing apart the magazines. Sometimes there's words and sounds, sometimes not. Sometimes it's just ripping the old magazines and newspapers up. But there's no judgments about it. And what's interesting to me to watch the process is that after a relatively short amount of time, I mean, it's physically demanding to be ripping up pages and tearing up pages from newspapers and magazines and stuff. Then there's this peace and quiet. And And there's a sense of what the kids really, really liked is that there's a sense of that's all I have to do. I don't have to clean it up. The volunteer's going to clean it up. And the kids and the adults really, really like that feature because once you get into that and express it, you're done.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it's fine
That's
to
true.
have somebody. It's a privilege, really, to have somebody else clean it up. Yeah. Yeah.
Not many times in life. Yes.
What?
Not many times in life that we get that privilege.
I know.
So,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
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 So perhaps we could move on to another institution that is still thriving, that you were very instrumental in creating, conceiving and creating, which is, of course, the Chaplaincy Institute
Yeah.
of Maine, CHIME, as it's called.
Yeah.
So I'm curious first why that drew you and what it's about. Just whatever you want to share about it.
Yeah. Well, I'll go back to what I mentioned earlier when I was providing grief counseling and families were bringing me their broken hearts. That was the impetus. That was the still small voice inside that propelled me to go to ministry school. But like many of us, I wasn't paying close attention to that voice back then. And I had to experience, again, we have to look at what we call good and bad things happening, because my counseling office literally caught fire and burned. And that got my attention. The still small voice suddenly got really, really loud and took the form of smoke billowing out of my office windows. And I lost all my books and things that people had given me from workshops and so forth and so on. And within a couple of months of that fire, I was in ministry school and studying interfaith ministry and chaplaincy. Matthew Fox was the founder of that school, the University of Creation Spirituality. And he had the great talent, I think, of being able to collect extraordinary teachers to teach at the school, people like Andrew Harvey and Clarissa Pinkola Estes and Andrew Harvey, just many others that I really learned a lot from. And it was, we talked about Collinsbrook School, but there was a real mirroring of Collinsbrook in the University of Creation Spirituality, because people were there because they wanted to study ministry and they wanted to learn about creation spirituality. It was not something that was imposed on them by the state or, regulations or anything. It was something that they were feeling in their heart, and everybody was really glad to be there. So when I came home from that, the loneliness came back, because I left all my teachers and students in California or scattered around the country. And I began talking with friends and colleagues here in Portland. They asked me, well, what have you been doing? What's about that university? So those conversations over probably a year became planning meetings for the Chaplaincy Institute of Maine. And we opened in the fall of 2002 with 10 really, really brave people, because they were signing up for a school that was in its infancy and brand new. They didn't know what it was going to be like. I didn't know what it was going to be like, except I had the models from the schools in California, the Interfaith Chaplaincy School that I went to, and then Matthew's School.
Yeah.
So we started then, and it's a 2-year program with classes one evening a week and weekend workshops once a month with some retreats built into it. And the idea is to train interfaith chaplains. And a requirement of the program is that every student bring 150 hours each year. So it's a total of 300 hours of volunteer service. We call it internship the second year. So that's been a wonderful way to grow the roots of the school, because many organizations, places like hospice and assisted living centers and schools and so forth, have had Chime volunteers providing spiritual care, spiritual service over the years as part of the program. So I think Chime is now just turned 20, and I think it's approaching having 200 graduates, ordained interfaith ministers out in the world providing spiritual care. Something I'm really really proud of.
Yes, for good reason. A gift that keeps extending itself, expanding itself into the community in terms of service.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I just had tea with one of our graduates who's begun a job providing spiritual care for crew members for tankers that bring oil into the harbor in Portland. He goes on board the vessels and provides spiritual care and support, and which sometimes takes the form of a really warm jacket, because they're from an Asian country where it's really warm and they need to survive a Maine winter.
My goodness.
But prayer and spiritual care is provided as well. So it's fascinating to me all the different varieties of jobs that people have found and created after graduating from Chime.
Yeah, how lovely, and jobs and populations that one wouldn't really even think of.
Yeah.
Very creative.
Yeah.
So I wasn't kidding when I said you left an amazing amount of contributions to this local community.
I appreciate you reminding me.
Yeah. How does it feel? I mean, just right now to sit with just having shared all this life of 80 years.
Yeah. There's always that, what I referenced before as the mystical paradox, because it's there, and I'm getting a little thirsty. I think I'm going to have a glass. There's the past and there's the present, being thirsty in the present.
Yes.
That's the paradox.
In this moment. Yes.
Yeah. And, I guess there's a cliche about, well, we can't rest on our laurels, and the past is the past. And it doesn't mean that I don't appreciate what you say and what you reflect back to me, that those places are out there and they're still providing care, doing their thing. And I'm extremely grateful for that. I love having the anniversaries come around, like Chime's 20th year and the Center for Grieving Children's 35th year. I really honor that.
Yes. Yes. And I can really hear your humility as well. And the appreciation for what, not even that you did it necessarily or helped create it, but that those exist.
Yeah. Yeah. To me, it's the fact that they still exist, it's a very hopeful sign.
Yes.
It's people really do want to connect with each other.
Yes.
They really do want to access, even though sometimes it's painful, they do want to access what they truly feel, and they don't want to be alone with that. They want to have somebody that's listening with love, without judgment, but with appreciation and love and acceptance, I think. Yeah.
Yes. Which brings us to the present again, which is your offering to be a spiritual companion.
Yeah.
At this time in your life, with tremendous amounts of experience and wisdom to share.
Well, it's interesting because I was doing spiritual companionship for a number of years while I was running Chime and afterwards. And then about a year and a half ago, my wife Christine died suddenly. And so I was plunged into the grief that I've mentioned. Um, and I'm guessing that people in the community sort of watched me have to live what I've been teaching
Yes.
all these years.
Yes.
All of a sudden, the grief guru is grieving. And as I said, I knew enough to know that I didn't want any distractions
Yes.
from grief. I really was, as I said, fierce about it. And I discovered as my grieving progressed that there were gifts in the grief that I didn't expect. Starting with the fact that I discovered that I indeed have a lot of friends, and it was really important for me to stay in touch with them in the sense that I could be honest about what I was feeling. And even sometimes it didn't fit the cultural model of what I was supposed to grieve, or it didn't fit the model of somebody writing about grief.
Yes.
People certainly gave me books to read, and I didn't usually read them, but I was really determined to carve my own path of grief, and that's what happened. And I mentioned the gift of having a neighbor come over and help me with that legal issue, and then another gift that I discovered in the process of grieving was Christine was not a born sailor like I am. I grew up around the water, and Christine didn't. She was very lovely and went sailing with me. She learned how to sail, and I appreciate that enormously. But I needed to be out on the water, and I learned that in the depths of the Maine winter last year. And so I signed up to go for a cruise on a schooner where they did all the navigating and cooking and everything, and I didn't have to worry about that. I could just be a passenger. And Christine never would have done that. So that was a gift that she gave me. And the day that I was carrying my duffel down to the schooner, and a crew member was showing me where my cabin was, and I looked up and saw on the cabin door the letter K, which was how Christine spelled her name, with a K.
Right.
And that was, there it was, the gift from her.
The gift.
Yeah.
Very beautiful.
Yeah. And the gifts continue completely unexpectedly, but they continue, and they are, I would say for me, not just life-giving, but life-saving.
Yes.
As my life continues on without her.
Yes. And to have her blessing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
For that to happen.
Yeah.
Yes.
She had a very full life, and I can see now that she was done. Her work was finished.
Yes.
And I didn't understand that before. I was too deep into my grief, but I have a little bit of time and perspective now to be able to say that.
Yes. Yes, and to celebrate your continuing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's lovely.
Brings us back to the present moment, Leah.
Yes, it does. A thirst and a sip of water.
Yeah.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
So
there's a wonderful, going back to the sip of water, there's a wonderful Rilke poem that says something about the person is wondering about who gets God a glass of water when he or she is thirsty. I just love that idea. Yeah.
Yes. A beautiful place to end, unless there's something else you'd like to add.
Well, I'm grateful for your questions and particularly for your listening. I really appreciate that a lot. So thank you.
And I very much appreciate your being us being here together.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Thank you.
and Happy New Year.
Yeah. Oh, but before we leave,
Yes.
I was thinking and writing earlier today about that whole idea, Happy New Year. And I was imagining that we are each visionaries, certainly of our own lives, if not other things too. I mean, you're a visionary to create this program. And I was thinking about that in terms of all of the energy that we put into saying Happy New Year and making New Year's resolutions and this is going to be a better year, whatever, all of that stuff that we do. I want to apply that to every day. Take all of that and apply it to every day.
Beautiful.
Be a visionary.
Happy New Day.
Be a visionary of your own life for the day. So that's what I leave you with, that wish.
Be a visionary of our own life for the day.
Yes.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you, my dear.
You're welcome.
It's been an honor.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.